AITA for destroying my parents' business after they humiliated me and handed me a $121,000 bill. For my birthday, my parents didn't give me a gift. They gave me a bill for $121,000 and shattered my world. But their biggest mistake was thinking I wouldn't fight back. My entire life, I lived in a beautiful, spacious cage. My parents, Eleanor and Robert Sterling, weren't just wealthy. They were pillars of our community, the kind of people who believed legacy was everything. Our family business, Sterling Custom Cabinetry, was renowned for crafting exquisite pieces for the rich and powerful. From the moment I could hold a sanding block, my destiny was written in the fine wood dust that settled on everything we owned. I never minded, not really. I loved the smell of cedar and oak, the satisfying whir of the lathe, the feel of a perfectly sanded surface. After getting my business degree, I came on board officially. My title was Operations Manager, but I was a glorified apprentice, a dog being trained to heel. My father made every major decision, and my mother managed the books with an iron fist. My ideas, like using sustainable materials or creating a more modern line to attract younger clients, were met with patronizing smiles. "This is how we've always done it, Alex," my father would say, his tone leaving no room for argument. The money was good, but it wasn't mine. I lived in a guest house on their property, drove a company car, and my salary was more of a generous allowance they could monitor. They framed it as teaching me financial responsibility and preparing me for the future when all this would be mine. I believed them. I worked 80-hour weeks. I smoothed over client disputes. I modernized the back-end logistics, all for the promise of a future that felt increasingly like a distant mirage. The tension started to build a few months before my 25th birthday. I landed a massive account with a chain of boutique hotels, a deal I'd cultivated entirely on my own. It was a modern, minimalist line, the exact opposite of my father's ornate style, but the client loved it. The profit margin was astronomical. When I presented the contract to my parents, expecting praise, I was met with cold silence. "This isn't who we are, Alex," my mother said, her fingers steepled. "We are artisans, not mass producers." "It's not mass production," I argued, my voice tight. "It's a limited run for 12 hotels. This one contract is worth more than the last 2 years combined. We will not compromise our integrity for a quick profit," my father stated, his voice final. He took the contract and, without another word, shredded it. I stood there, watching my hard work turn into confetti. That was the moment the first crack appeared in the foundation of my life. The gilded cage, I realized, was still a cage. I began quietly saving my own money, stashing away every bonus and side hustle payment I could, preparing for a storm I felt was coming. I just didn't know it would arrive on my birthday. The morning of my birthday started deceptively normal. The sun was shining, and the air was crisp. My mother had insisted on a large family gathering, a special celebration for my quarter century. She'd been unusually involved in the planning, which should have been my first clue. I dressed in a new suit, a small act of rebellion I'd bought with my secret funds, and headed to the main house. The house was buzzing with the chatter of aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends. 35 people, all smiling, all clapping me on the back. A huge banner read, "Happy 25th birthday, Alex." Underneath it, I felt a surge of guilt for my recent suspicions. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe the shredded contract was just a bump in the road. The party was in full swing when my father called for everyone's attention. He stood by the grand fireplace, a champagne flute in his hand, my mother beside him, her smile serene and unreadable. "Family, friends," he boomed, his voice warm and commanding. "Thank you for coming to celebrate our son, Alex. 25 years is a milestone, a time to reflect on the past and look forward to the future." I smiled, feeling a genuine warmth spread through me. This was it. The apology, the acknowledgement, perhaps even the announcement of my real promotion. "As you all know," he continued, "Alex has been a part of Sterling Custom Cabinetry for many years. We've invested everything in him. Our time, our wisdom, our legacy." He paused, letting his words hang in the air. "We've also invested a significant amount of money." My mother stepped forward, her smile never wavering. She held a single, elegant envelope. "We believe in transparency, Alex, and in responsibility. So for your birthday, we wanted to give you a full accounting of that investment. She handed me the envelope. The room was quiet, a few people chuckling, thinking it was a joke, a oversized check, or a witty card. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it. It wasn't a card. It was a bill. The heading was stark: Investment in Alexander Sterling's Development and Living Expenses. My eyes scanned the itemized list, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was all there, every single cost from my entire life, meticulously documented. Private school tuition from kindergarten through high school, $48,000. For years of university tuition and board, $82,000. Apprenticeship training at Sterling Cabinetry, $150,000. Below market rate rent for the guest house, $36,000. Use of company vehicle, $24,000. Food and utilities, $45,000. The list went on and on, a horrifying ledger of my existence. The numbers swirled, but my eyes locked on the final total at the bottom, circled in bold, red ink. Total amount due, $121,000. The air left my lungs. I looked up at my parents, their faces a mask of benevolent expectation. The room was utterly silent. You could hear a pin drop. "Consider it your inheritance, paid in advance," my father said, his voice losing its warmth. "It's time you learned the true value of money and the cost of the opportunities you've been given." My mother added, her voice sweet as poison, and effective immediately, "Your position at Sterling Cabinetry is no longer required. We've decided to take the company in a different direction. We need to free up that salary to cover your debt." The humiliation was a physical blow. I felt the heat of 35 pairs of eyes on me, a mix of pity, shock, and morbid fascination. I was a specimen under a microscope, my life, my worth, reduced to a debt I never knew I owed. The cage door hadn't just been opened. It had been ripped off its hinges, and I was thrown out into a cold, unforgiving world. I didn't say a word. I just folded the bill, placed it carefully in my inside suit pocket, and walked out of the house, the sound of my own shattered heart echoing in the silence I left behind. The days that followed my birthday were a blur of numb shock and cold, simmering rage. I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, the kind with stained carpets and the constant smell of stale cigarettes. The $121,000 bill sat on the rickety desk, a constant, taunting monument to my naivety. I stared at it for hours, the itemized list of my life feeling less like an accounting and more like a declaration of war. But a strange thing happens when you have nothing left to lose. The fear evaporates, replaced by a clear, focused determination. They thought this bill would break me, would send me crawling back, begging for my job and forgiveness. They had no idea it was the spark that would ignite everything. My first move was to a lawyer, not a family friend, but a sharp, ruthless litigator named Ms. Ada Thorne, who had a reputation for winning messy, personal cases. Her office was all cool glass and steel, a stark contrast to my father's warm, wood-paneled den. I slid the bill across her desk. She read it, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up, a glint in her eyes. "This is creative," she said dryly, "and legally, for the most part, unenforceable. You were a minor for the majority of these charges. Parents have a legal obligation to provide food, shelter, and education. You can't invoice your child for their childhood." A wave of relief, so powerful it made me dizzy, washed over me. "So I don't have to pay it." "Not a cent," she confirmed. "But that's not the real play here, is it, Alex? This is about what they've taken from you. Your labor, your ideas." She advised me to gather evidence. And so, the unearthing began. I spent my days in the motel room, my laptop glowing in the dim light, piecing together the story of my own exploitation. I accessed old cloud backups and dug up files I'd forgotten I had. I found timesheets and project logs proving I had personally managed projects that brought in over $2 million in revenue in the last 3 years alone. I found the digital mock-ups and client email chains for the boutique hotel deal my father had shredded, proof of the future I had built and they had destroyed. Most importantly, I found something I had almost forgotten about, a series of digital designs for a revolutionary modular shelving system I had called Nexus. I had designed it 5 years ago, in my spare time, on my own computer. I had shown it to my father once. He'd called it a clever hobbyist project and told me to focus on real work. A quick patent search confirmed my suspicion. Nexus was registered. Not in my name. In the name of Sterling Custom Cabinetry. My blood ran cold. They hadn't just stolen my labor. They had stolen my intellect, my creativity. This was no longer about a fake debt. This was about intellectual property theft. Meanwhile, through a former colleague who was sympathetic to my situation, I learned what the different direction for the company was. My parents weren't retiring. They were preparing to sell. A massive corporate conglomerate, Artisan Home Collective, was in advanced talks to acquire Sterling Cabinetry. The deal was predicated on the company's unique assets and future-proof product line. The centerpiece of their presentation to the buyers? The Nexus shelving system, touted as my father's latest, groundbreaking innovation. The audacity took my breath away. They had fired me, humiliated me, and were now preparing to cash in on my stolen work for a life-changing sum. The sale was scheduled to be finalized in 60 days. I brought all this back to Ada Thorne. She smiled, a predator's smile. "This is better than I thought," she said. "We have a very strong case for wrongful termination and significant damages for intellectual property theft. We can file an injunction to stop the sale." An injunction would be public, I said, a plan beginning to form in my mind. Something darker and more personal than a simple lawsuit. It would spook the buyers, but it wouldn't be enough. Ada studied me. "What are you thinking, Alex?" "I'm thinking they wanted to teach me a lesson about business," I said, my voice low and steady. "So I'm going to give them one. Don't file the injunction." "Not yet." I explained my idea. It was risky. It was a gamble. But if it worked, it wouldn't just cost them money. It would destroy the very legacy they held so dear. It would prove that the foundation of Sterling Cabinetry wasn't built on their integrity, but on the stolen work of the son they had cast aside. The hunter was about to become the hunted, and they were still blissfully unaware that the game had even begun. With the $15,000 I had managed to save in my secret account, I became a ghost. I rented a small and used storage unit on the industrial side of town and began assembling my arsenal. I bought a second-hand industrial 3D printer, a high-end laptop, and a subscription to the most powerful CAD software I could afford. My motel room and the storage unit became my command center. I was going to beat my parents at their own game, not in a courtroom, but in the marketplace. I started with Nexus. My original design was good, but it was 5 years old. With new materials and the lessons I'd learned from the boutique hotel deal, I could make it better. I worked day and night, surviving on coffee and takeout, refining the connectors, optimizing the assembly process, and sourcing sustainable, high-pressure laminate that was both beautiful and incredibly durable. My new version, which I dubbed Apex, was simpler, stronger, and 30% cheaper to produce than the original Nexus. But a product is nothing without a brand. I couldn't be Alex Sterling. That name was now associated with family drama and, in the small business community, my very public humiliation. I needed a new identity. I settled on Kairos Workshop. Kairos was an ancient Greek word meaning the right or opportune moment. For me, it was the perfect name. This was my moment. I built a sleek, minimalist website for Kairos Workshop. I used my knowledge of the industry to craft a compelling narrative about a collective of anonymous designers creating the future of functional furniture. I launched the site with just one product, the Apex shelving system. The photos were stark and professional, shot against a white background in my storage unit with a good camera I rented. The copy focused on its revolutionary design, ease of assembly, and sustainable credentials, all the things my father's company was not. Then, I played my first card. I knew the marketing director for the boutique hotel chain, a young, forward-thinking woman named Chloe who had been furious when my parents killed our deal. I reached out to her from an encrypted email account. "Dear Chloe," I wrote, "I was sorry to hear your deal with Sterling Cabinetry fell through. You may be interested in a new product from an emerging studio that fulfills the same modern, scalable brief. No connection to the Sterlings. Purely a superior product." I attached the specs and a link to the Kairos site. She wrote back within an hour. "This is incredible. It's like a refined version of what Alex was pitching. Can we order samples?" I sent them, manufactured under the cover of night in my storage unit. A week later, I had a purchase order. Not for 12 hotels, but for 20. Kairos Workshop's first order was larger than the one my father had shredded. The money started to flow in. It wasn't $121,000, but it was mine. Completely and utterly mine. I upgraded from the motel to a small, furnished apartment and traded the storage unit for a proper, leased workshop space. I hired 2 people, a brilliant, recently laid-off CNC machine operator named Ben, and a sharp logistics manager, Maria. I paid them well, treated them with respect, and they were fiercely loyal to the mysterious Kairos. Meanwhile, I kept a close eye on my parents. Through my industry contacts, I learned that the sale to Artisan Home Collective was progressing. But there were whispers. The buyers were asking questions. They'd heard rumors of a new, disruptive player, Kairos Workshop, and were concerned that Sterling's flagship Nexus system suddenly looked dated and overpriced. My father was reportedly furious, scrambling his team to innovate, a task he was ill-equipped for, having relied on my ideas for years. The trap was set. They were investing time and money into defending a product they had stolen, while I was quietly building a better one and poaching their very own clients. I was the ghost in their machine, the flaw in their foundation, and they were starting to feel the tremors. The bill for $121,000 was still in my desk drawer, but it was no longer a symbol of my debt. It was a trophy, a reminder of the day I was set free. The final move was approaching, and this time, I would be the one calling for everyone's attention. The day of the Sterling Custom Cabinetry quarterly board meeting arrived. It was a small board, mostly consisting of my parents, a few silent investors, and their slick, perpetually smiling lawyer, Mr. Davies. I knew the schedule intimately. I had prepared the briefing documents for these meetings for years. Today, however, I hadn't been invited, but I had every intention of making an appearance. I wore the same suit I'd worn on my birthday, the one I'd bought with my secret funds. It felt like armor. In my briefcase, I carried a single folder. Inside was not the $121,000 bill, but something far more valuable. The original design files for the Nexus system, time-stamped from 5 years ago and linked to my personal computer alongside the patent filing in the company's name. I also had the purchase order from the boutique hotel chain made out to Kairos Workshop. I walked into the Sterling building for the first time in 3 months. The receptionist, Brenda, gasped. "Alex, your parents are in a meeting." "I know, Brenda," I said, my voice calm. "I'm here to see them." I didn't wait for her to call ahead. I walked down the familiar hallways, the scent of wood and varnish filling me with a strange mix of nostalgia and resolve. I paused outside the heavy oak door of the boardroom. I could hear my father's voice, confident and booming, undoubtedly presenting the glowing and fabricated projections for the Nexus line to the investors ahead of the sale. I opened the door. All conversation stopped. Every head turned. My father was standing at the head of the table, a PowerPoint slide glowing behind him. His face cycled through surprise, confusion, and finally, anger. My mother, seated to his right, went pale. "Alex," my father said, his voice dangerously low. "This is a private meeting. You need to leave. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." I replied, my voice echoing slightly in the stunned room. I walked to the empty chair at the foot of the table and placed my briefcase on it. It pertains directly to the future of this company, specifically to the sale to Artisan Home Collective. Mr. Davies, the lawyer, began to stand. "Young man, this is highly inappropriate." "What's inappropriate?" I interrupted, locking eyes with him. "Is selling a company based on stolen intellectual property." I opened my briefcase and took out the folder. I slid a copy of my original Nexus files toward my father. "Do you recognize these?" The original design schematics for the Nexus system, dated over 5 years ago, created on my personal laptop. My father's eyes widened. He snatched the papers, his hands trembling slightly. "This is nonsense. Those are company assets." "Are they?" I asked calmly. I was never under a work-for-hire contract that assigned my personal intellectual property to the company. I checked. My lawyer checked. These files were created on my own time. You saw them, dismissed them, and then, when it was convenient, you patented them under the company name. "That's theft, father." The investors began to murmur amongst themselves. The slick PowerPoint presentation about innovation suddenly felt hollow. "And then there's the matter of the boutique hotel chain," I continued, pulling out the Kairos purchase order. "You remember them? You shredded the contract I secured. Well, it seems they still needed shelving. They just bought it from my company, Kairos Workshop. Our Apex system, which, I might add, is a significant improvement on this." I gestured dismissively at the Nexus slide behind him, dated design. The room erupted. Your company, one of the investors barked. Robert, what is the meaning of this? My father was speechless, his face a thunderous shade of red. My mother found her voice. This is a vendetta, a pathetic attempt at revenge because you couldn't handle the responsibilities of the real world, she hissed. No, mother, I said, my voice cold and clear. This is business. The lesson you tried to teach me with that ridiculous bill? I learned it. I learned that sentiment has no place in commerce. I learned that you protect your assets. And I learned that if you don't, someone will take them from you. I looked at the investors. The sale to Artisan Home Collective is built on a lie. The flagship product is stolen, and the market is already shifting to a superior competitor, mine. If you proceed, you will be sued for IP infringement by Kairos Workshop the moment the deal is signed. The lawsuit will be public, messy, and will absolutely destroy the valuation of this company. I let the silence hang, heavy and absolute. I had them. I could see it in their panicked eyes. So, here is my offer, I said, my final move. I am prepared to sign over all claims to the Nexus design to you for a one-time payment. The exact sum you so generously gifted me on my birthday. I paused, meeting my father's livid gaze. $121,000. Payable today. In return, I walk away. Kairos Workshop becomes your only real competitor, and you can explain to Artisan why their golden goose is suddenly laying rotten eggs. It was a checkmate. They could pay me a fraction of what my designs were worth to avoid a catastrophic lawsuit, or they could watch their precious sale and their legacy evaporate into thin air. The gilded cage was now their prison, and I held the key. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. My father looked like a statue carved from pure rage. My mother had buried her face in her hands. The investors were in a frantic, hushed debate. Mr. Davies was sweating. Get out, my father finally whispered, the words scraping from his throat. One of the investors, a pragmatic man named Mr. Sterling, no relation, held up a hand. Robert, be quiet. He turned to me, his expression unreadable. You have proof of these claims? The original files? The patent assignment? Everything is with my lawyer, Ms. Ada Thorne, I said. She has instructions to file an injunction against the sale and a lawsuit for IP theft by 5 p.m. today if I do not call her with a confirmation of payment. Mr. Sterling nodded slowly. He looked at my parents with a gaze of pure disappointment. We were led to believe the Nexus system was the result of in-house R&D. This complication changes everything. He looked back at me. The offer is $121,000. Yes, I said. A clean break. You get to keep the Nexus name and the patent, though I'd advise you to improve it quickly. The market has already seen a better alternative. The investors huddled again. My father looked like he was having a stroke. The legacy he had built, the reputation for integrity he cherished, was being publicly dismantled in front of the people whose respect he craved most. He wasn't just losing money. He was losing face, and for a man like my father, that was a fate worse than death. After 10 agonizing minutes, Mr. Sterling spoke. We accept your offer. The funds will be wired to an account of your specifying within the hour. My parents said nothing. They were utterly defeated. The $121,000 they had tried to use as a weapon to control me was now the ransom to save their own crumbling empire. The irony was so perfect it was almost poetic. I gave them the account details for Kairos Workshop. Pleasure doing business with you, I said, and I turned and walked out of the boardroom for the last time. An hour later, sitting in my new, modest but clean apartment, my laptop chimed. A wire transfer of $121,000 had landed in the Kairos business account. I picked up my phone and called Ada Thorne. It's done, I said. Stand down. Congratulations, Alex, she replied. You played a brutal hand perfectly. I hung up and looked at the framed $121,000 bill I had placed on my wall. It was no longer a source of shame or even a trophy. It was a lesson, a receipt for my freedom. In the end, they did give me my inheritance. Not the company, not the gilded cage, but something far more valuable, the ruthless drive to build my own empire. Kairos Workshop grew rapidly. The story of the mysterious startup that outmaneuvered the mighty Sterling cabinetry became a legend in the industry, attracting top talent and bigger clients. We never looked back. A year later, I heard through the grapevine that the sale to Artisan Home Collective had fallen through. Sterling cabinetry, its reputation tarnished and its innovation exposed as a fraud, was struggling, a ghost of its former self. My parents had lost the thing they loved most, their unassailable image. As for me, I found a different kind of wealth. I built a company on my own terms, with respect and transparency. The $121,000 became the seed money for a legacy I could be proud of, one not inherited, but earned. They thought handing me that bill was their victory. But in their cruel, short-sighted act, they had given me everything I needed to win the war. My greatest success was, and always will be, the life I built after they fired me. The story ends here, but our journey doesn't have to. If you want to join me for the next tale, please subscribe and ring that bell. Your support means everything. Thanks for watching.